Survivor Series Deadly Game from 1998, Finn, when the finals, they did the big long tournament. We had Mankind versus The Rock in the main event. Rock was the babyface, the valiant babyface, got up against corporate Mankind, and we had it all going on. And then in this main event, we see that eventually Vince McMahon is in cahoots with The Rock instead of Mick Foley. What do you remember about this tournament? Some people say this is, it's peak Vince Russo time, but I mean, this tournament was a big success, right? And The Rock had just turned babyface a few months before. Then they do this turn. What did you make of it at the time?
Yeah, it was huge. I remember we put The Rock on the cover of issue 54 of Power Slam that came out in December of 1998.
Corporate champion.
Corporate champion. Really good cover photo. And actually really pretty good issue, actually, of the magazine. PS50 issue, and we did a 4-page feature on the show, lots of photos. It was to me, it was peak Attitude Era. In some ways, the quintessential Attitude Era pay-per-view. Because, it was like 14 matches, so obviously none of them really were given, well, very few of them were given time to develop. And a lot of the matches on the undercard were like almost blink and you'll miss it type of material. Mm-hmm. I do wish that Steven Regal and X-Pac really had been a blink and miss it type experience, because that was one of the worst matches of the decade. It's actually worth going back and watching it. It's just so bad it's good. Just staggeringly awful. Extraordinarily abysmal, that match. But I remember the show for the story and for the shocking outcome, with Rock, he gave the McMahons the eyebrow, didn't he? And this that little indication that he was turning heel. And as you said, he'd only recently turned babyface. It was at the September event, wasn't it?
Breakdown.
In the cage match.
Yeah. Breakdown.
So it only been only 2 months. Sorry, something just flew by then. I appeared a little bit frightened. Some large insect. So, it was only 2 months earlier that he turned babyface it was the Blue Bard cage match, wasn't it? Was it Mankind and Ken Shamrock? I think it was,
yes,
wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And that was like an amazing match, amazing performance. And we'd seen the SummerSlam match with Triple H, and that was really good. But the cage match felt bigger for The Rock, mostly because the audience was so enthusiastically behind him. I mean, he was their hero. He was the chosen one. You could see he was going to be a top of the line main event guy based on that one match. So the idea that he would then turn heel 2 months later was unthinkable. I always remember the match. Well, actually, I can't even remember the match, so I haven't done very well now, have I? I remember the spot in the match where Big Boss Man threw the nightstick and Rock caught it, didn't he?
Yeah.
And we were supposed to think that Rock had intercepted the nightstick, but as we later learned, obviously Boss Man, who was part of the corporation, was actually throwing it to Rock, and that was who did Rock beat in this? That was the semis, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think Rock beat Boss Man in the first round. And then who did he face in the second? I'm going to try and figure it out while we're chatting here. I'll pull it up here.
But there was that amazing spot where the Billy Club, the Tom for Sick, with the nightstick was thrown, and Rock caught it and he threw it at some pace. It was amazing, and then he struck whomever he was wrestling. I can't remember who it was. Threw the stick out of the ring and scored the pin. And it was like, oh my God, Rock has outsmarted the corporation. So that was an amazing sort of additional layer and a red herring, obviously, to throw us off the scent of what they had planned for the main event. And as you said, Mankind was part of the corporation, although there were some hints there, weren't there, Kenny, that, Vince wasn't entirely convinced that Mankind was corporation material.
Yeah, he was reluctantly working with Mick Foley. I should point out in the chat, they said, so Rock beat Big Boss Man in the first round, Ken Shamrock in the quarterfinal, and then beat The Undertaker by DQ in the semi-final. So they did a good job of building up that The Rock is beating all these heels and he's beating everybody en route to the main event. I mean, I think it's one of the... I never saw the turn coming at Survivor Series, and I think... But then it made sense why he did it. It got him to the point where he was WWF champion for the first time, and that's why he sold out. And it made sense. A lot of stuff that Vince Russo did later did not make sense, but this one with Vince McMahon as the filter did make sense. And I do. You mentioned the Steven Regal X-Pac match. I wonder if Steven Regal was aware that he looked like he was going out to gay pride in his lumberjack outfit that he wore.
Real man, the real man's man.
The real man's man. But
you know, I mean, obviously Regal was going through a rough time during that period. So you know,
I'm not giving him too much flack.
It might seem like I'm picking on him, but I mean, the match was a wonder. You know, it was just like so bad it was good. And you know, and Rock turning heel, joining forces with Vince and Shane, set up all the matches with Mankind. Mankind became champ. Then we had the Royal Rumble match. We had the halftime heat match. We had was it a ladder match on Raw? I think it was a ladder match on Raw that was pretty special.
Yes.
I think that was the last match of their feud, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then that led, of course, to St. Valentine's Day Massacre and the arrival of Paul White in the cage match between Vince and Steve Austin. But it set up a blisteringly hot run for both Rock and Foley and WWF as a whole. So, yeah, I would call the event, you know, a triumph of storytelling and booking and execution. And really, yeah, one of the finest pieces of creative business that the company did, certainly that year and maybe, you know, during the entire Attitude Era.
Yeah, and even earlier in the show, I loved the Shane McMahon turn when he was counting for Austin and then he flipped him off and he was the referee and he turned, and that also made sense. Yeah, so it's worth checking out if people have not seen it.